Hello everyone, I'm here today to talk to Taisha Nurse, who is the HR Manager for Global Mobility, Diversity and Inclusion, and the President of the Global Women's Network for McDermott. Today we're going to have a chat about how McDermott are building their diversity and inclusion programs throughout the business, and more specifically here in the MENA region. And also we're going to touch on how COVID-19 has potentially impacted the progress of this. So welcome, Taisha. It's a pleasure to have you here today. So I'll just start with my questions. So if you could tell me a little overview about how important diversity is in McDermott and what value you personally think it brings to the organization.
So as you said, I am the diversity inclusion lead in our HR function, and that's actually a newly created function within HR. And so what we focus on is looking at the various centers of excellence within HR to see where we can drive diversity. So it's more of a strategic initiative that drives, and we really focus on advancing DE&I within the MENA region. So we're very focused on MENA. By the very nature of the workforce is very diverse as it relates to cultures and nationalities. So we want to, what's the right word? Definitely progress that continued diversity, but then look at gender diversity. As you said, it's highly male dominated. So it is really important because we do definitely see the value of diversity. And we're also focused on inclusion. So if by definition diversity is looking at the similarities and the differences, well then inclusion is making sure that everyone feels respected, valued, appreciated within the organization. So we see diversity, but really our big game plan is to go into the area of inclusion. We also have created within 2000 a MENA Diversity Council. So that council is made up, it's headed by our senior VP of the MENA region, and then his leadership team sit on the Diversity Council. And so they really oversee the governance, the strategic initiatives of anything coming out of the D&I function. So we do take it as a strategic business imperative and not an initiative driven by HR alone. So we've to really make that D&I function very robust, and it touches all areas of the organization.
Which is really important. It was actually one of the questions that I had later on, is about your leadership and the buy-in from leadership. I see so many businesses having these initiatives maybe from HR, but unless it's from the top, it's very difficult for it to kind of make an impact. In terms of your strategies to overcome any roadblocks, what programs do you have in place, what initiatives do you have in place?
So amongst the HR work streams, we have a work stream for recruitment, for promotion and progression, talent development, reward and wellness, networks and support channels, inclusive culture, and communication. And under each of those, although they have their day-to-day job, the initiative to support the business, they all create 2 to 3 initiatives that are specific to diversity and inclusion. So if I give one example, let's say within the reward and wellness, we said maybe not as much as gender diversity, but include. We wanted to introduce flexible working, which was an initiative prior to COVID. We just had to do it quicker. We formulated that in January and we put it in place by March because we had to. We also rolled out employee assistance programs, and again, that was outside of anything due to COVID, but we just rolled it out much more quickly because we saw that it was needed. And then we are also looking at benefits. So how can we enhance benefits, whether that's cafeteria style benefits or just looking at the packages that we provide to employees. And so, like I said, that may not be strictly diversity or gender diversity, but it is looking at the population and saying, what do all of our employees need at this point in time, and pushing out some of those initiatives. If we talk about recruitment, what we're doing within the recruitment area is clearly looking at targeting highly qualified women to go into the organization. We're also doing things like blind CVs, just as, trying to see if that makes a difference. And then we're doing a lot of education with our recruitment team first, and then with our managers around unconscious bias and how you'll have that tendency kind of to recruit what looks like you, sounds like you. So driving that self-awareness so we can also capture a very diverse group from our recruitment.
Yeah, and do you find naturally you get more male CVs for most of the roles? So you're looking at other channels to be able to support that as well and build an employer branding for females.
But a lot of women out there. So again, this was a 2019 initiative, and we definitely did a lot of recruitment and brought in a lot of female candidates. But what, you know, and with our head recruiter, recruitment lead, we just had to cast our nets a little wider and be a little more patient and dig a little deeper. So it's not impossible, but if you want to take the easy way out, you probably just get mostly male CVs. But once you dig a little deeper, try different tactics to get that wider net, you'll definitely find qualified women.
Which is why it's important to have leadership support on this, because people otherwise are very busy. They will take the easier route, right? It's something else off their plate. How do you measure and how do you bring everybody accountable for your diversity and inclusion within?
So by taking a very strategic approach and having each work stream within each center of excellence define how they will contribute to all of these initiatives on a quarterly basis, we sit with that MENA Diversity Council, which are the heads of our businesses, and we have to feed back to them what progress we're making. We also solicit their feedback. Is it visible enough? Is it targeted enough? Do you feel that the entire population really understands what we're trying to drive? Also, for each HR work stream, they have a separate executive sponsor that are the functional leads. So as they, on a quarterly basis, do their updates, they're sitting with their business sponsors to say, okay, this is where we are. How does it look? How does it feel? Are you actually feeling this change within the organization? And if you're not, leverage them to support the initiatives. So there may be work going on within the HR space, but we use our leaders as business champions to drive those initiatives out.
Yeah, which is key, because everybody has to have buy-in for this to work. In terms of any roadblocks, have you come across any difficulties in creating a more diverse and inclusive workspace?
We have a big population here in the MENA region, and we're predominantly within Saudi, Qatar, and UAE. So with different backgrounds, we realize that not everyone has the same starting point and understanding for diversity and inclusion. And so where a lot of our initiatives may roll out from corporate, what we've had to do is just factor that no one knows anything, and we start with baby steps. So right now we're rolling out unconscious bias training and blind spots to just start to define what is diversity, what is inclusion, and what does that look like within this region. So I don't know if it's roadblocks, but I think we probably had to take a few steps back to do that foundational education before we could really start to move forward. So we're doing it hand in hand. We still have our initiatives, but I think I know when I speak to people, they think, okay, diversity is gender. So in our unconscious bias training, we talk about 36 dimensions of diversity. So in the training, you know, people are saying, oh, I didn't know it was so broad. Like I only think about gender, age, nationality, or the likes as being diversity. And so what we're trying to drive is, no, it's so much broader. And then our end state is really to build an inclusive organization. And what does that mean? And what does that look like for McDermott in the MENA region?
And have you taken learnings from global initiatives in terms of, you know, how you've approached it in the MENA region?
We've actually all started at the same time. So we had our CEO sign the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion in 2019. And then corporate started to roll out their global diversity council. And at the same time, we rolled out ours. So we're actually doing things in tandem with them and feeding in and sharing experiences and how is it going for you, etc. So we've taken a lot of the products. Sometimes we have to tweak them, the trainings, etc., to make sure that it's culturally appropriate for the MENA region. So they're not ahead of us. They're probably in line with us. And so it's just that sharing of experiences.
That's great to hear that, that you're on a par. It's interesting to see the outcomes of each region, because I imagine they'll be quite different and there'll be some learnings from that.
Yes, and everyone's actually taking it at their own pace. So I know there's some that aren't moving as progressively as other regions.
In terms of female population, moving to gender, what's your balance like throughout the business?
Good question. I should have pulled that graph. So total population, I want to say we're about 13 to 15% male to female, but then up into manager and above, it drops down to about a 3% representation. Then when we look at it by business function, we know for a fact that the majority of women are in our support areas. And so we have less in engineering, in fabrication, in project management. So a lot of our initiatives are also focused on how do we either move people internally, or how do we then recruit externally to kind of close that gap? And so it's looking at different strategies to close.
Yeah, and that's very difficult when you don't have many female leaders. There's also not that role model there in terms of, we are seeing a lot of graduates in the region in areas like engineering and, the youth population. There are significant females taking those routes, but if you don't have the senior leaders, the female leaders, it's how you get them there and how you keep them there. And I find this with every business I speak to. It's very much our pipeline's quite good, but we get to managerial level and then they all disappear.
Yeah.
So, I often talk with people about, and you mentioned it before, about inclusiveness, about how you've got those people there, kind of tick your diversity box, but how are you making everyone included? How are you tackling everyone's personal situation to be able to keep them in the business?
Yes. And so what we've also launched is a global mentoring program. And for the Global Women's Network, which is what I'm a president of, what I've asked the women to do is, if you are either a mentee or a mentor, please sign up. And so it may be that you're mentoring someone in another region or the likes, but because globally we're still quite a small population, we have to leverage the resources that exist out there.
Yeah, that's a great initiative of doing that, using the global. Interesting. Moving to the current situation, we can't not talk about COVID-19. I found that many businesses are having to almost pivot their focus, obviously, and as a result, there's many reports that have come out to say that the gender diversity will take a step back, and that women are taking a step back, instead of us moving forward with this. So, what impact have you seen in your organisation, if any, in terms of maybe people just not being available as much to drive these programs forward?
So again, we established our initiatives in KPIs in January, and we actually have our second quarterly meeting in June. So we're all, as the HR workstream leads, trying to get as much done during this process. But we probably have less recruitment in place. So we wouldn't be perhaps getting the targets that, that we were aspirationally looking for. And also what we found is the conversation isn't necessarily gender diversity, but it is about looking at flexibility and having an agile workforce. And so another project that has come under diversity and inclusion, which is a really interesting one, is what is the future of work going to look like? So we've started to do our research and now saying, okay, let's say we go to a gig workforce. So these are flexible temporary workers, or we have a core population that works within the office, and then we start looking at having a flexible population that we would employ for specialized skills for a set period of time that come in and out. And we actually have this structure with our offshore vessel population where they are day rate contractors. Project, they come in and they come off the project. And so when you look at their terms of employment, you look at their benefits package, it's so different because their needs are different. So we're starting that conversation. Definitely, I think, going to become much broader, and it may sit within the inclusion versus diversity, but also I think there's diversity in the type of people that will want to work like this and can work like this. And it's also working with our employees who are full-time salaried staff that are used to coming to work every single day. You know, now we don't have that. So it's also looking at your work isn't measured on how many hours you sat at your desk, but based on deliverables. And when you sort those deliverables, if you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you shut down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because you want to attend to your children, that's fine. But that's also a mind shift and a culture shift that we have to look at enabling our managers to handle. So we're also looking at things like inclusive leadership, skills training, and that's about managers being more flexible, being more empathetic, compassionate, and driving more deliverables versus counting the number of hours. So it's almost made it so much broader, but it has to sit somewhere. And when you really think about where would it sit within any HR area, it actually feels right to sit within diversity and inclusion.
As I said before, it's addressing individual problems, right, or individual situations. And what you've mentioned there is something that I personally, and as a business, we've been championing for almost 5 years now. The fact that you should have that flexibility in business if you want to find the best talent, not just from, we started as mums at work, so it's very much about women balancing the two things or going back after a career break, but also young talent as well. There's many reports to say Gen Z will not sit at their desks from 9 to 5, so I think what you're doing, and a lot of businesses are doing the same. We had a client today that's announcing virtual working from now on. And, people are seeing cost savings. People are seeing the fact that if they have virtual working, they can get talent from all over the world, right? So they're getting their best talent. They can have, as you said, a good workforce, which is more cost effective. They can find that talent that is untapped because their parents, their mothers, and they can't, go to a full-time job, but they're actually super talented. So there's lots of positives for that. Have you found that the flexible working that you put in place, has it worked well for you so far?
It has worked. So McDermott was actually exempted because we're in construction. So we kept a number of employees that could actually be in the office, and then the remainder were working from home. So we've run surveys with our wider population to just understand what are your needs while you're at home. If you had to measure your own productivity, where would you measure it at? And I think about 20% said actually more productive. I think challenges, which I find for myself, is actually work more hours because you sit. So we were like, okay, we need to probably find this balance because we all have collectively said we're actually sitting and doing 12 to 15 hours. But what we've tried to do is just make sure that the technology is in place. I'm not good with technology, but like we're on WebEx, I have Teams, I have Zoom, however you need to interact with me, fine, I'm completely available online at all times, mostly. We have WhatsApp groups, it's quite endless. So we make sure that managers are also interacting with their team. So we did ask questions. Do you have enough contact with your manager, with other team members? We've asked managers to hold virtual coffee meetings whereby there's no agenda. You just dial in once a week for an hour and people talk about what are you doing. So Global Women's Network, we do that on a weekly basis, where whoever they just want to talk about what strategies they're using in their families, with their children, It's just it's a really open dialogue, and the feedback has been quite positive because sometimes you just do need to have that chit chat and have someone say, "I feel you," like I understand what you're going through.
Oh, yeah, especially with the homeschooling. It's painful. Yeah, I think this time has put a lot of pressure on everybody, of course, but with parents, it's significantly higher in terms of how they're balancing everything. And it sounds like you've put some great, understanding policies and processes in place to support that, and that's really good to hear. And companies will get loyalty from that, from their employees, without a doubt. In terms of your advice to somebody that's looking to build more gender diversity within their team, what would it be? How would you, if they were starting from scratch, how would you tell them to approach it?
I think what I always say before, if you're going to start with diversity and with inclusion, because you can actually have a 50-50 population, but you may lose women if they don't feel like it's fully inclusive. So if the end result is everyone feels valued and respected, that is the training ground to welcome diversity. So I think if you go there first, then second thing is really have an honest conversation amongst your leaders. So I think in the West, they're more open to have a conversation about we have a problem, we have an underrepresentation of gender. I find within the East, we are a little more hesitant to admit to the issue. Mm-hmm. So we need to have that conversation of, do we have a problem and why do we have a problem? And being able to speak about it. And it may be because, well, we may say we can't find the resources, but then we have to go and look deeper. So we want to understand, well, why is not the case? Now, for a long time, and I've heard it in recent years from managers that would say, but engineering and construction, that front office, it's not appropriate for women. And, well, let that be the woman's decision. And so, or sending people offshore, it was, but why would any woman want to work offshore because of her family or this, or if she doesn't have a family, and it's kind of like we have to break through and have that very honest conversation. If that's the culture, where do we need to shift it? But if dance around what the real issues are, we're never going to get there. But I also think the culture within the Middle East, with changes in Saudi and the likes, it's definitely starting to welcome these conversations and open up the doors to more women within, traditional companies like McDermott, which is oil, gas, construction.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's all my questions for today. So I just want to thank you for your time. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would take away, even though I work in HR, that diversity and inclusion is not an HR initiative. It really needs to be a business initiative. I think we've spoken about how you involve the organization and make it more strategic. And how I've had to sell it to many business managers is that there is a business case and it hits the bottom line. So there's a lot of research out there now that shows it actually drives profitability, business performance, and when, if you're working with a finance manager or any business manager, when you can start to quantify how this impacts the bottom line, that's really a great business case for it versus just saying, what's nice to have, let's be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you managed to quantify it at all? I mean, you're quite early on the journey, but in terms of employee engagement, employee retention, business productivity, creativity?
Not yet. We haven't found those metrics to be able to quantify it for McDermott. We know there's a lot of external data, which we brought to the table, but I think we need a little more time to get to that point where we can quantify it.
Well, that's the future then.
Thank you. This was fantastic. I've enjoyed talking about it.
Yeah, it's great to hear that a business like McDermott as well are really sort of pushing it forward, in a non-traditional kind of business. They're really pushing it forward, and they've got the right structure, they're using the right channels, they have senior leadership buy-in. All these are ticking boxes in terms of it being successful from what I've seen with other companies. So kudos to you, well done.
Thank you, thank you.
Lovely to talk to you today.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
See you.
Bye.